from the lawsuit that took him out of comics to his journey to being one of the most highly anticipated movie heroes of this decade, here's the untold truth of Shazam. After his debut in 1938, Superman was a huge success. So successful, in fact, that he had inspired a massive boom for the brand new superhero genre, including a huge wave of imitators and ripoffs. Dozens of new titles hoped to create the next Superman, but Fawcett Publications was one publisher that actually managed to do it. In 1940, writer Bill Parker and artist C.C. Beck introduced the world to Captain Marvel, a character who had all of Superman's powers, but with two key differences. First, Captain Marvel's origins were drawn from a more magical, mythological source than the sci-fi explanations behind Superman's power. Second, and far more importantly, his mild-mannered secret identity was a kid. Billy Batson, a homeless child, was chosen by the wizard Shazam. With a single magic word, he could transform into an adult who wielded the powers of 6 mythological heroes, turning him into the world's mightiest mortal.
Say my name.
In other words, every kid who wished they were Superman could now read the adventures of a kid who could become Superman whenever he wanted. With that idea, Captain Marvel was an instant success. If you got a good memory for trivia, you might already know that Billy Batson and his magical alter ego made their debuts in the very first issue of Whiz Comics. But did you know that was actually Whiz Comics number 2? That might seem confusing, but that's only because it is. Before debuting a new title, publishers would often create ashcan editions, cheap, low-quality versions with low print runs that they could use as proof of concept to attract potential advertisers and secure a copyright. They'd done the same with Parker and Beck's new character, then called Captain Thunder, but still hadn't settled on a title, publishing it as both Thrill Comics and Flash Comics. By the time they got to publication, they decided to go with Whiz. Since they'd already published the story in the ashcan, Whiz started at number 2. Even though they technically printed it twice already. Superman might have been the original, but as the 40s went on, Captain Marvel quickly became the most popular superhero of the decade by outselling Superman in Action Comics. According to the Museum of Comic Book Advertising, Captain Marvel Adventures would eventually hit a high point of 1.3 million sales per month. That's an impressive figure under any circumstances, but consider that over the course of those same years, Captain Marvel and his sidekicks were also appearing in Whiz Comics, WOW Comics, Master Comics, Captain Marvel Jr., Mary Marvel, and the Marvel family. In fact, he was so popular that Hoppy the Marvel Bunny, a rabbit version of Captain Marvel created for Fawcett's line of funny animal comics, was headlining 2 titles every month. For comparison, Superman and Batman each had 3, and one of them was World's Finest Comics, the series they appeared in together. If you ever go back and read any Captain Marvel comics from the 40s, it's not difficult to figure out the secret of their success. They're actually good. While a lot of Golden Age creators struggled with figuring out the rules of the new medium and the superhero genre, the Captain Marvel stories presented fun, straightforward, and well-structured adventures. C.C. Beck's art had always been fantastic, but the arrival of writer Otto Binder was the final ingredient needed to make Captain Marvel great. Binder and Beck would become the team that most identified with the character, and in 1943, they created what is generally considered to be one of the most important stories of the Golden Age, the Monster Society of Evil.
Meet the Monster Society of Evil, the vilest villains of Fawcett City united. Together, we'll conquer the universe!
It was an epic story that ran through a full 25 issues of Captain Marvel Adventures, the first long-form, multi-part superhero story in comics. It was also the first story to feature a villainous super team made up of pre-existing villains who united to take down the heroes, paving the way for the modern-day event comic. As you might have already guessed, National Comics, the company that would later become DC, was not happy about Captain Marvel outselling Superman. So unhappy, in fact, that they filed a lawsuit against Fawcett that made it to court in 1948, alleging that they'd violated the copyright on Superman by ripping him off for their own character. Unfortunately for Fawcett, that actually is what happened.
I idolized you. I wanted to be you. Whenever I was out there facing down the bad guys, I'd think, what would Superman do?
In a much later interview, Roscoe Fawcett would recall telling his staff, "Give me a Superman." Even beyond that, the similarities were impossible to ignore. Superman didn't have the market cornered on super strength and invulnerability, but the cover to Whiz Comics number 2 featured Captain Marvel tossing a car, much like Superman on the cover of Action Comics number 1. In 1954, the courts ruled against Fawcett, and they lost the rights to continue publishing Captain Marvel stories. After the infamous lawsuit, Captain Marvel's adventures ended, and while he wouldn't be seen on the comics page again for almost 2 decades, a character that was selling over 1 million copies a month doesn't just vanish from pop culture. Plenty of readers had fond memories of the character, and plenty of publishers were eager to recreate that level of success. In the United Kingdom, a publisher called L. Miller & Son drafted artist Mick Anglo to create an unofficial continuation of the series. The character was renamed Marvelman, and the magic word was changed to Kimota. Since the British printings of Captain Marvel had ended at number 24, Marvelman picked up at number 25. It ran from 1954 to 1963, but in 1982, the strip was revived in the pages of Warrior. It was rebooted in a much darker direction by Alan Moore and Gary Leach and served to pave the way for later Moore projects like Watchmen. In 1972, DC publisher Carmine Infantino decided that Captain Marvel had been absent long enough. With that, DC licensed the characters from Fawcett and began publishing all new adventures of the original Captain Marvel in the pages of Shazam. The first issue was drawn by C.C. Beck and featured Otto Binder, who had left DC in 1969 to focus on sci-fi novels, as a character in the first issue. The series would run for 35 issues, bringing the Marvel family to a new generation of readers and incorporating them into the DC multiverse. Readers weren't just reintroduced to the good guys, though. In Shazam number 28, Black Adam returned, an evil version of Captain Marvel who had made his only appearance 32 years earlier. While he lost that first fight, he'd go on to become one of DC's most prominent villains, and an occasional hero. When DC revived Captain Marvel in 1972, it was in a series called Shazam, and by 1974, they'd been prohibited from referring to their lead character as Captain Marvel on the cover at all. The reason? An upstart superhero publisher called Marvel Comics had snatched up the copyright on that name for a new character they'd introduced in 1967. Their Captain Marvel was a spacefaring soldier of the Kree race named Mar-Vell who had come to Earth on a mission of conquest and decided to become a cosmic hero instead. In an interesting twist, Mar-Vell was revamped in 1969 with a new red costume with a big yellow insignia on the chest and a young sidekick, Rick Jones, with whom he switched bodies in a flash of light whenever a hero was needed. Of course, there would be other versions of Captain Marvel that Marvel Comics would make, including one that might be a bit more familiar to movie-going audiences. Needless to say, the fact that both DC and Marvel were publishing superheroes named Captain Marvel caused no end of confusion. Eventually, when the DC Universe was rebooted with the New 52 in 2011, Billy Batson's alter ego was rechristened as Shazam. When they revived Captain Marvel in the 1970s, DC licensed the character from Fawcett Publications. In 1991, however, DC made the Shazam family a permanent part of their universe, acquiring the rights to the character outright. At the same time, veteran creator Jerry Ordway was assigned to reboot the character yet again in the pages of a fully painted graphic novel called The Power of Shazam. In addition to retelling Billy Batson's origin, the story also tied him more closely to Black Adam, who had his own civilian identity. Theo Adam, a greedy archaeologist who murdered Billy's parents while on a dig. Released in 1994, The Power of Shazam was an unqualified success and led to the launch of a monthly title of the same name the next year. Ordway would write and provide covers for the series and draw a fair bit of it too. With nearly 50 issues published, it was and is the longest-running Shazam series since 1954. After the DC Universe was rebooted for the New 52, Shazam started appearing as a backup story in the pages of Justice League. In addition to a new costume and a new origin for Dr. Sivana, this version of Billy Batson wasn't quite the wholesome, good-natured kid he'd been in the past. Instead, Geoff Johns and Gary Frank reimagined him as far more bitter and cynical than readers had seen before. The idea was that his initial suspicion and self-interest would give way to a genuine heroism and an affection for his adopted family. There was one other big twist, though. In the pages of Flashpoint, the universe-ending event that led to the New 52 reboot, readers got a glimpse of a version of Shazam who had split his powers among 6 kids. This in itself wasn't a completely new idea. Mary Batson and Freddie Freeman had been turned into Mary Marvel and Captain Marvel Jr. respectively the same way, as had a few other characters all the way back in the Golden Age. This time, though, Billy decided to split his powers not just with Mary and Freddie, but with his foster siblings Darla, Pedro, and Eugene. The result is a whole team of heroes with a much more diverse cast than previous versions of the Shazam family, who will all be appearing alongside each other in the pages of the next Shazam title. It also feels a little reminiscent of a very different superheroic captain.
When the 5 powers combine, they summon Earth's greatest champion, Captain Planet. The Planet!
Way back in 1941, Captain Marvel made his big screen debut in a Republic Pictures serial, beating Max Fleischer's animated Superman cartoons to the theater by 6 months and predating a live-action Superman serial by 7 years. Now, in 2019, Billy Batson returns to the movies in Shazam. With Asher Angel as Billy Batson, Zachary Levi as Shazam, and Mark Strong as Dr. Sivana, the film sticks pretty close to the 2012 version of the hero. Weirdly enough, while Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson has been attached to the project longer than nearly anyone else, he doesn't appear in Shazam. He's been cast as Black Adam in DC's cinematic universe, but Warner Brothers has announced that they'll be featuring the character in a solo film before he crosses paths with his old nemesis. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite stuff are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.